got shot and they ran in your country. Police brutality is racial profiling. Police brutality is harassment. Police brutality is national persecution. Police are nothing but violence and dead. How many black people got dead? We only 6% of the population. Over 35% of the population. They not gonna suffer profit. They not gonna suffer profit.
Welcome to another episode of Moving Mountains. We have Reverend Keion Jackson and Nevin Perkins with us again today for that follow-up discussion that we promised you on the Jersey City Rally for Peace that happened on Mother's Day, which is exactly a week ago today. So we're back to talk about how it went with Nevin and to also talk about how do we move forward from here? Like, what do we do as a people to ensure that these incidents don't continue to happen? So I'm Samaya Simone, and my co-host,
Dr. Sheila Ely. I can't say that enough.
and a congratulations to Dr. Sheila Ely too.
Maybe it'll wear off me in a month or two.
So, Keion, how did it go? Like, I knew we were anticipating, we didn't know what to expect when we talked last week. How did it go?
I'll interject for that. Good afternoon, everyone. It went great. It went as phenomenal as it could go under the circumstances. I think the biggest key point to take away from that is when we spoke last week, I talked about, claiming the narrative, because right now the narrative that's surrounding the entire issue is that members of the Greenville community are violent. So the press that came out the next Monday was anything but that. The narrative was ralliers find a way to social distance and advocating against police brutality. And that's pretty much how the day ensued. While we were marching, we did not chant. There was no actual loud disturbances going on that would cause ordinances. I was the only one that was speaking. And while I was speaking, I was giving political education to our brothers and sisters as we strolled down Martin Luther King Avenue on our way to the South District Precinct. Once we got there, the police were inevitably waiting for us, about 15 to 16 deep, some of them not practicing social distancing themselves, and some of them not wearing masks. But that's a different conversation about authorities feeling as though they're above the law, right? We got there. There was no altercation in between us and the police. We followed the protocols of social distancing. Like I said, it was much of a silent protest. There were a few different speakers. A brother that's running for Congress, the new African Black Panther Party spoke. I spoke. A message was articulated on behalf of Pastor Richardson. His church is on Grant Avenue. He was unable to attend, but my older brother articulated his sentiment. And I continued to give out political education. We had pamphlets that were about just a bit bigger than a card. They articulated our list of demands. We had maybe about 300 of those, and we gave them all out through the entire day. We also had COVID resources in terms of masks and gloves that we were distributing to the community. And this brings me to my point of, where do we go from here? I think, of course, it's a question of, continuing to hold law officials accountable. But I think the conversation now needs to shift gears toward, inward in our community. So where do we go to build community so that we can, focus on those things of holding ourselves accountable and creating personal responsibility in the community so that we're looked at, as individuals that have to be taken seriously individually and collectively. So in the spirit of that, my coalition, my brotherhood, Black Men United, we are following that up with a community cleanup. And we're essentially going to be cleaning up that same street that we were protesting down and, following those same lines of giving political education, but also providing, resources, COVID resources again, toiletry resources in terms of, socks, toothbrushes, soaps, and things like that for the houseless. And just, engaging with the community, letting them know that we're here and the work is going to elevate and the work is going to continue.
Great. Wow. Okay. So that's great. So you guys are going to do a cleanup afterwards then. I mean, you guys are going in to do a community cleanup on the same street that you guys protested?
Yes,
Wow,
ma'am.
that's the first time I've heard that.
Yes, ma'am. That'll be on June 6th, starting at 11 a.m. too. We'll probably be out there, I would say. We did one actually last year, right? So this was when we did it last year, this was looking in the works to be annual. Frankly, we're gonna try this one out on June 6th, and I have no doubt, that it'll be successful. But I'm looking to follow that up monthly.
Okay.
So, maybe we'll do MLK Ave June 6th. Maybe we'll do Ocean Ave July 6th. You know what I mean? And just
Okay.
do different sectors in different areas in the community. Maybe we'll do 2 parks in August, just so that we can tap in with the people in different locations in our community and let them know that, we're here to provide services, aid, and unity.
Right.
Well, I think it does something else too, what you're doing. You're bringing pride back into the community and the neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
when you do that. For too long within our neighborhoods, people are so busy. You see trash on the street, you think nothing of it. And you think that it's someone else's responsibility. But as a community, it becomes a collective responsibility, anyone who sees it. So if you keep doing that monthly, and maybe even twice a month, others will pick up on what you're doing and they'll start doing it too. Because that's the one thing that's missing in a lot of our neighborhoods, the pride within that community, that neighborhood. That's where you live. And if
Right.
we don't take pride in where we live, we can't expect anyone else to view us differently.
Right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that, I mean, it's definitely one pride, but also that other section of political education is letting oppressors know that the only reason why you think we are violent, or the only reason why you think we behave as animals, is because of our economic disparities, of one, how our communities are kept, and that's not totally our doing. That's also the city not putting garbage cans in that particular area.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Right.
or that's also our sanitation workers who may not live in this area, or who are assigned, when they take out the garbage, do they take out the garbage with care, as they do on other streets? I mean, because I've seen it just by living on the college campus itself. The way they would take out the trash where my church was versus where the dormitory was just 2 totally different things. Um, and then is their perception of the people that they don't care. So why should we? So definitely the part of the political education is what Dr. E said. It's showing pride, right? So we're standing up for you, and we're going to work with you to restore that pride in the community. But it's also to dismantle that particular mindset of, you do have Black organizations who are mutual aid groups who care.
That's right.
We're not
Right.
just going to show up for the accolades and the protesting and to hold the bullhorn.
Right.
We're going to show up for what needs to be done. And likewise with our brotherhood, with BMU, is especially, I oversee the education part of it, where we're able to talk about political education and theology and just Black history, period. It's definitely about dismantling even our own mindsets. And I think the biggest thing, I did not attend the protest because I had to cook my mother breakfast, and I had to preach.
Well, that's
2
good
services.
too.
I had to preach 2 services. But the biggest thing that I think that the protest represented was solidarity.
Yes.
It represented solidarity. And yes, that gave us some traction. That definitely gave us some articles. That gave us some news, press releases. But individually, each person represented represented a spirit of solidarity and an overall call to action for serenity, I would even say, for that particular part of that community and for the family. And so the thing is that we have a lot of organizations who will come out who will come and protest, who will come and speak, but where are you after the fact? And
Right.
that's something that BMU we constantly try to combat that, because we have a lot, like I just said, we have a lot of organizations who are not willing to put on some sweatpants and some sneakers and sweep up. And so, it represented solidarity. It was silent, which is not heard of,
Mm-hmm.
just for the culture of Black activism, which it is a culture.
Right.
And it was silent. It was peaceful. It was social. We were able to maintain social distance as a whole entire organization. Um, and I think that the families of the people affected really appreciated the work that God allowed us to do on that day.
Wow. I know I was deeply touched when I watched the footage, and the fact that everybody was working with you, and Nevin, and there was one point when you guys were walking and you said, when you guys have you ever had the police just run up on you when you were just sitting there minding your business? I'm paraphrasing you. I'm not saying exactly what you said. And there was a man across the street from you, and he literally like turned around, like, so it was like apparent that what you were talking about was real experiences that
Right.
people in that neighborhood had. Like, you were really touching people as you were going through.
Right, and let me touch on that for a second, because you've taken me back to that specific block, that specific brother, and that specific situation, right? So I was articulating that police brutality, as it pertains to this issue, doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Stop and frisk is police brutality. Racial profiling when a brother is driving is police brutality. You know what I mean? And just direct harassment and the disconnect of the police and the community overall is police brutality. So I did my best to articulate that, but also in a manner that was transparent to the community that I was having a conversation with, right? Because that was my biggest thing. I had the bullhorn, I had the visual with me in terms of BMU, and the signs spoke for themselves, right? They were very visualization signs. They were descriptive. They articulated clear and direct messages. So that supported our element of having a silent protest. But it was my job to just engage in that political education. And one of the things I spoke about after speaking about that was that, the police are just agents of a bigger system in terms of mass incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
And, I tried to articulate that as transparent as possible in terms of the fact that Black men make up about 6% of the population in America, but over 30% of the prison population. So I articulated that they're locking us up for profit.
Yeah.
And when I articulated that, there was a great deal of receptive energy from the community as we were walking past these blocks. And, I articulated a few other things. I talked about some of the things that Brother Keion talked about in terms of the neglect that we receive from the establishment. The frequent liquor stores on every corner. Why is a liquor store able to get a grant to open up, but we can't open up more community centers and art centers and, things of that nature? Why is there so many hindrances in that? Food insecurity in terms of there being a bodega on every corner, but we don't have a Trader Joe's, we don't have a Whole Foods. So, I was just, and even in terms of real estate and development, rarely do we see in our communities new development happen without economic displacement for our people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we see vacant lots in our communities. If we see new houses coming up, we know our people not moving in. And I'm speaking statistically, but I'm also speaking as a resident of the community, and I'm watching my street that I live on be gentrified, right? So this is statistically, but this is also physically in the space, watching it before our eyes. So as a community, I think it's essential, and I think BMU can play a critical role in, as we have done and as we continue to do, into just awakening the people of their circumstances, of their community. Some people already are awakened. They may just not have the articulation or understand the direct, like, socioeconomic disparities, but they know something's wrong. They know something's wrong when they drive out of the community and it looks different downtown. They know something's wrong when they get treated differently versus other people. So as an organization, as a brotherhood, as a coalition, it's on us and it's on the rest of us to provide that education to the people. And in the spirit of that, as Brother Keion said, he's spearheading our education department as the director of education. We're going to be coming out with some political education classes this week via Instagram Live as an initial platform. And you know what I mean? They're going to be very introductory courses in the beginning, but we'll take people on a political and a racial journey and get them that awakening that they need so that they can make contributions to the space.
Right.
That's a good idea,
That is a good
because we do have disparities, and that's because we don't own the land.
idea.
We don't own the property.
Mhm.
And as Blacks, we have to own the property within our communities. That's how we bring in businesses. If we have stores that are not fit for us to shop in within our communities, then we need to see if we can bring a farmer's market into our community once or twice a week, so that people can shop at the farmer's market and leave those stores on the corner that's overcharging for the GMO foods that are not healthy for us alone, because that's how we're going to affect change within our communities. Of course, they can come in and gentrify it, because we don't have the economic base to own the land that the house is sitting on, or the house outright. We don't have Black banks who are there to try and grant us the loan that we would need to purchase. We have a few Black banks in this country. 2 are in New Orleans, so that they can make things like this happen. So when we talk about changing our economic base, it is possible for us to do that, but that's also where we need our churches. Our churches, they really need to go back to educating people on how to build a community, starting with economics. Because I can promise you, it doesn't take as much money as we think it does to be the owners of a home,
Right.
or to start a business, or to even have, we should be able to have the farmer's market in the parking lot of the church. I mean, even if we can do that,
Right.
that's better than us buying from a market store that doesn't suit us, and educating our people about where that liquor comes from, and that it is there to hurt your liver and keep you from doing the things that you need to do. So why are you supporting a liquor store in your community that doesn't serve the community? We should always ask, if these businesses are in our community, what are they giving back to the community?
Right.
What have they done to
Come and
empower
go.
us as a people? If they haven't done anything like that, then I'd rather travel 2 miles to another neighborhood if I've got to have that liquor. That's the difference they made. They didn't decide that we could get on the bus because they had a boycott in Birmingham. They decided we could get on the bus because they had boycotts all over the South.
Right.
70% of our people were riding those buses. That's who rode the buses to go do the domestic care, to keep the children, to go to work back and forth. And when they got off of the bus in all of those states and they couldn't sustain it, and they tried, because you know how long that went on. They tried. But when they saw that they could not sustain that public service bus, that's when they decided you can sit in the front of the bus. It's all about economics. And if
Right.
there's a business that's not supporting you in that community, they need to go.
It's always been about economics. It was about economics with Lincoln, with the emancipation. And in terms of our community, right? We spoke about getting that awakening. We also got to decondition ourselves from the internalized oppression that we have, because in a society that constantly dehumanizes us and devalues our worth, a lot of our brothers and sisters begin to attribute their worth to material status that isn't connected to the Black community. Right now, in a practical statement, I'll have a brother that'll spend $300 on a Gucci shirt, but he won't support the sister that has a clothing line in the community because she charges $50 for her hoodie, and her hoodie isn't the name that Gucci is, right? So we've got to, as a community, we've got to get intracommunal in the terms of how we circulate our wealth, and in terms of what we're attributing value to. Gucci is just a name. Ferragamo is just a name. Louis Vuitton is just a name. And let's be frank, these are names of European white men.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of what we want to be represented, in terms of what we want to be branding, we need to be branding and representing ourselves. We need to be branding and uplifting ourselves. And that starts, as we articulated, all of us, with our dollar. Are we spending our dollar with people that, you know, supply black food supermarkets? Are we spending our dollars with black vendors? Are we buying black authors? You know what I mean? We have to take it there. We have to take it there.
If I can, just for a moment, I love Viking, and I love any movie with a sword in it. Just count me in to watch it. I love sword fighting. I love fencing. I love Japanese samurai stories, the culture. You know, I used to have a few swords myself. I say that because when you do the history, whenever a warrior or a swordsman gave his sword to the king, meaning his oath, he was respected and repaid in some type of way. When we look at Sukwe, who was an African Japanese samurai who was sold to the Emperor of Japan as a slave, because the Emperor of Japan did not believe in enslavement the way the West did, he made him a samurai. And in return, the African samurai gave him his sword. He was repaid in land, and he is repaid in history. And well, not in every history book, but you would have to Google him to read about him. Black folks are the only folks who unwillingly gave their sword to America, who constantly give their sword to America in terms of economics, in terms of their lives in the military, and can come back to the inland and never get what is owed to them. And that has been the constant issue in our politics and in the whole entire globe as a whole. We've given our lives, we've given our sword, we've given our oath, we've given our women, our children, our black boys, our black girls, our some of the brilliant minds of our time created with the chemical that makes the cell phone come on. I mean, we've given everything to this place. And we are the only folks who are not heard at the table, placed at the table, given a table, given wood to even build our own table. And that is the central problem with our government. And you know, it just came to me because my mother and I, we watched this show on Netflix called The Last Kingdom. And it's about King Alfred the Great and Uhtred the Bold, who are both warriors in their own right, who are working to unite England. And Uhtred is a king of his own land, but he got kicked out. He gave Alfred his sword. And every time he gives Alfred his sword, he is never, ever given his due. And every time, even after slavery, when we willingly went to battle, even for our freedom at some times, when we tell our kids that college is not for them, go join the military, and we're the first ones deployed. When we sign up for the military, and we may sign up to be a chaplain, we're put in infantry and we're put in the first line of battle just because. When Donald Trump sent them boys and them women to the border, who was there? People of color that look just like them on the other side of the gate. We constantly giving everything, and we are the only folks that don't get anything in return that we've earned. And so that's why we will see folks support things that they have no business supporting. That's why we will see folks who run for Congress and run for Senate as an activist and get in and become a snake. That's why we will see pastors become cops. How you preaching about the boy, but you locking up the boy on Monday? It's the oxymoron of our life. And And yet we can blame this, we can blame that, but that's what it is. That's the core. That's where it comes from.
Right.
I've said it before. A people who don't understand their past can never fully appreciate the present, and they will not have a future to go to.
Yes.
You have to know your past. You have to be consecrated in it so you're not consistently repeating the past. And here we are as indigenous Black people in this country. We don't fit here because they don't want us. They tell you, go back to Africa. Well, I'm sorry, we're here. There's no Africa to go back to because many of us encompass maybe 8 different nations within Africa. It's a continent. When you say go back to Africa, there are nations on that continent that we encompass. We belong here. We are the indigenous people of this country, but yet we're not empowering our young to understand that. We're not doing all that we can do to make sure that they're not so focused on the American dream, but on their dream within the community, because we are our brother's keeper.
Right.
And when we come together as a community and realize just what Reverend Keion just stated, we understand our past, we understand how we got to our present because of the past, then we will have a future to build on. Because you can't build if you don't have a foundation to build on. The foundation is the past.
Right.
And yet we have not been taught our history to understand it. So how do we do that? Because you're not going to do that in a public school.
Right.
Your kids are not going to get our history in a public school.
No.
We have to do it within our community.
Right.
How many communities do we actually have? I mean, when they think about communities, they only think about what you see in the inner city, and is, as Nevin said, they want the inner city back because that's where they come in. They left us in the inner city, they went to the suburbs, now they want the inner cities back because it's more convenient for work purposes. So how do you do that? How do you get it back? You raise the taxes on the property owners.
Mm-hmm.
You make it impossible for them to be able to cover the costs of their mortgage, their livelihood, their ability for sustenance to exist,
Right.
and their taxes. You
Economic
tax them out,
succession.
you move the folk in who can pay the taxes to take over the homes. They've come in New Orleans. They've bought homes for $30,000, $40,000. They've renovated them because they could pay the taxes, and they got them at a tax sale because the people who were there couldn't pay the taxes. Renovated them, and then they put a $300,000 price tag on it, knowing that you can't afford to stay there or come into that area. And this is how they're doing it. So the economic base for us is very important. And we have to start empowering one another to get back there. It is not impossible when you've got, in every Black community I've ever seen, nearly a church on every corner. So why not start with the religious leaders?
Yep.
Let's start with them. That's the association we need. We don't need all of these other associations where you're coming in, you're preaching this, you're preaching that. We're going to heaven anyhow. You're preaching prosperity, but you're not teaching anyone how to get there. And you're not dealing with the issues that are in that community right now, today.
Right.
Until we start doing that, we're going to consistently see what we're seeing. And so, of course, you've got folk who come in and they don't see you as human because they feel like, goodness, you've been here all this time. You got the bootstraps. You're not taking advantage of it. Your men are standing on the corner at the liquor store.
Not the bootstraps.
Yeah. And that's another story. The boot, we were never given the boots. We saw the straps. But this is the talk.
Right.
And I know you've all heard it. Why can't you pull yourself together? And that means pull yourself up out of bootstraps.
You know
Right.
what?
MLK said we've been left bootless.
Right,
Right.
right.
The funny thing is that I spent some time. This is funny because I'm wearing a Drew theological sweatshirt, but I spent some time at Pittsburgh Seminary, and Pittsburgh. So the seminary sits in between Eastminster, which is the Black impoverished community, and then it sits in between, or it's in the middle also of Highland Park, which is the suburb.
Right.
And I noticed something is that they make it comfortable even before they get there. They put a Target. Now, what poor Black person could afford anything in Target? I'll wait. Nobody. Put a Target there, Trader Joe's down the block, CVS. CVS is one of the most expensive pharmacies. Okay. Starbucks, and then you get a little independent coffee shop with green coffee beans that don't nobody know where they come from. I saw it before my eyes. They built these beautiful apartment buildings on top of stores. They put in a Warby Parker, a glasses place. Again, we don't know about nothing about that. And they closed, or they tried to close actually, this African clothing store that had been there for 40 years. And I went to the seminary's leaders and I said, y'all ain't gonna say nothing about this. But I had to check myself because the seminary had been there since 1840 something, and it's Presbyterian. It's been white all its time. Right. They were white when Eastminster was white. Then you leave Eastminster, you go up the hill, and all the Black folks who can't afford Eastminster, right? They were annexed into one apartment building in Garfield. Garfield is vacant. It is nothing but fields with mice, and there's one apartment building.
Oh my goodness.
One project with all these families in it, but all the kids go to school where? In Eastminster. So the seminary, right, is in between all of this. And it's funny because I begin to think to myself, when you go to Ghana, you go to the doors of no return. If you look up, there's a church that sits on top of the slave dungeon. I don't mean to preach. I'm sorry. I feel my help coming though. But when we look at that in context, that tells me that the very folks that were enslaving folks to bring over to the New World, into the Caribbean, into parts of Hispaniola, were the same folks who were praying to Jesus. The same folks in Louisiana and Mississippi who were singing, "Come thou fount of every blessing," were the same folks at 12 noon singing, "Any, many, mighty, mo, catch a nig by his toe."
Right.
The seminary sat in between social enslavement. All these kids that lived in that one apartment building with over, I believe, 2,000 families went to school in Eastminster, and Eastminster is being gentrified right in front of their eyes.
Wow.
And so that roots what I call in the essay that I just put on my blog spot, we call that demonarchy. It's not a democracy. It's demonarchy. It comes straight from principalities of darkness.
That's actually a perfect name to call it. I like that.
It is.
It is, right?
It's no, because we have to understand that systems are only created by those who are trying to eradicate something. The church became an institution when we started to eradicate paganism. In Ethiopia, the church became an institution when the king became saved. America became an institution not because of religious freedom like it's taught in school.
Right.
It became an institution when it began to transport human beings to till the lands that they could not upkeep.
That's right.
That is called demonarchy. That's why it's written, at least in my Judeo-Christian text, that we fight not against flesh and blood. My
Right.
fight is not with Donald Trump. It's the principalities of darkness that he comes from.
Right.
And so if black folk who are Christian and Muslims, if they really realize that the only piece of property that you own is your masjid, right, is your church, economically, we would be at a better standpoint if we got leaders back into our communities who were able to flip up and create revenue. And
Right.
so, but when your leaders are the product of the monarchy,
Yeah.
that leaves us in a catch-22. And that just came to me when Dr. E and Nevin was taught what is this system that we're product of? What is the system that we constantly live in? And it brought me back to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is the most segregated place right now in the North.
Wow.
I'm telling you, everyone is divided. And then you got the black football team, Pittsburgh Steelers, they all married to white women. They come from the same parts, Eastminster and Garfield.
Wow.
And so when you talk about, and then Pittsburgh Seminary is one of the only seminaries that only has one out of 20 members of faculty, one is African American. And he, Reverend Dr. R. Drew Smith, he cannot be the only professor that's fighting for change. They have one black dean, Reverend Dr. John Welch. It can't fall on their shoulders. Someone else has to be there to help them.
Right.
But you know, the issue is this, and this is what I've seen happen in New Orleans. The minute a black pastor, leader, he gets a huge congregation, then instead of working with black organizations that will keep everything within that community, they get courted by the white associations.
Right.
So once that happens, then you get a bigger church, but you don't get all of the amenities that should be going with that church. If you're going to have a church within a community, you've got a large congregation, you've got smaller churches around. What is wrong with coming together as your own association, starting your own seminary? We have one of the largest black seminaries in the South in Louisiana, and it got swallowed up by the white seminary. It got taken over because what was happening prior to the civil rights movement, this seminary educated black Christian leaders to go out and make sure that there were schools that educated our children within that community, not just public schools, but they had schools for our kids. They had business schools so that those who did not have the money to go to college, couldn't afford to go to college, would go to secretarial school, barber school, mechanic school, what have you. This is how the community came about. We had one of the largest, it closed up in the 70s after civil rights, the largest black hospitals in all the South, Flint Goodrich, that where all of the educated black doctors who had gone to Meharry or whatever school they had gone to would come for our community, sitting in our community. That's where you went to the clinic. That's where you went to the hospital. These are the doctors who made the home calls. Where is that now? Can you tell me any community that you know of that's in now? And this was all concentrated with the efforts of the black churches. Where are they? And what are they doing for our people? Better yet, rather, what they're doing now, they're going to those seminaries because those seminaries don't contain our history. It's like Keion says, you got one black man here that's supposed to be responsible for, is he important, our history, our Christian journey, our religious history to the young men and women coming into the seminary? I doubt it.
Right.
I doubt it. And here again, we go back to the fact that without the foundation of the past, we're trying to consistently, we're like what's that little rat
A
called?
rat race? Yeah, rat race in the wheel. Right.
No, the
wheel.
one, what was it? What,
Hamster.
yeah,
hamster.
we're like the
Hamster on the
hamster,
wheel, right.
constantly in the cage on the wheel, in the cage on the wheel, and that's all we're doing.
Mhm.
Here we are. And we've
I
been
think-
doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it because we can't move forward.
Right.
Right. I think, and Brother Keion articulates this to me all the time from a religious standpoint, but it's also rooted in civil rights, because religion was the backbone of civil rights at the time, right? Where were we holding our rallies at? We were holding our rallies in the church or in the church parking lot. The church was funding the supplies for the protests. The church was funding the people who were getting economically displaced from boycotting things. So,
Right.
the church was the backbone of the movement. And as Brother Keion always articulates to me, we got the right to vote, and we sat down. We sat down from a position of urgency. We sat down from a position of quote unquote success, to the point where we thought that the major achievements were accomplished. And there's a multifaceted situation there, right? Because there's that, but there's also the assassination, the character assassination, and the jailing of most of our beloved leaders and ancestors around that time period of the late civil rights, early Black Power movement, the destabilization of our communities. And, as mass incarceration maneuvered it and weavered its way into our communities, we became destabilized to the point where we rarely have central leadership, and the church just kind of sat down and took a back seat.
But there's a reason for that. So during the civil rights movement, we didn't have this nonprofit status. So the church it was a true sanctuary of protection for our people. So what the government decided afterwards, there will truly be a separation of church and state. We're going to give you nonprofit status. You won't have to pay taxes on this, 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 and this. You can go get this, 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 and this, but you got to stay out of our business. And what was a part of their business? Our civil rights going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why we've got the quiet mouse churches, mouse leaders now, because they want to keep that nonprofit status. This proves it more than anything, the COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
I am appalled to see leaders, church leaders, not holding service. You have been given authority to have your congregants come into that church and not be afraid of catching a virus with all of this social distancing and masks on your face. I know of one minister in Massachusetts that's holding church. They had a few here that got arrested and they went back to holding church. So now you can hold church here in Texas because they were willing to get arrested to do so. But where are our leaders saying, you know what? We're not going to be afraid of what's out here when we've been given authority and not fear to do this. Viruses have been around, and going into deep prayer about a decision to make. So we're quiet in our community.
And you're right, because it's taught in the seminary. And so here's the thing. As we begin to stand up for the inner city, white theologians, and especially, now I am a moderate, I'm not conservative, so I don't consider myself evangelical in my theology, but white evangelicals, which stem from racist theology, let's be very clear, and misogynistic theology, they begin to come into our Black seminaries to incorporate them into whiteness. And so, I mean, even when we look at the New Orleans Baptist Seminary, I mean, what in the world? And I love it, but what in the world? When we look at I would even say, I mean, Princeton in New Jersey, although they have their issues, I mean, they've been one of the most constant seminaries to me especially in homiletics, which is the study of preaching, to make sure that they have an African American homiletician or practical theologian and a white homiletician, practical theologian, to teach both sides of the religious spectrum. But anti-political rhetoric is taught in seminary. I mean, it comes straight from people like Bonhoeffer, who said politics is not the task of the Christian, but yet you're fighting for the Holocaust. So it's
Right.
not the task for what type of Christian? What type of Christian are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so, you know, it inherently goes against text. Okay. Like I said on our last call, every time Jesus told someone to drop your net and follow me, Rome was without fish. When he gave sight to the blind, that person stopped being a beggar and he was able to work. That kind of work unbalanced the Roman government, right? And so this is why Pilate had to wash his hands clean. You said you were the king of the Jews. You gotta go. You gotta go. You're inherently obstructing the government. Okay. But anytime you see a radical, whether religious, academic, or on the ground, they have to be eliminated. It is our policy. It is our policy. And that's why, although I couldn't make it to the protests because I had to preach 2 services and I had to do sonly duties, I told Nevin, I said, we're recording. Let me not say that. I said, be careful. And then put it that way. Be careful. Because anytime, especially when that woman twisted your words up in the Jersey Journal, you needed to be careful. And then that was my duty as his best friend and as his brother to say, you need to be careful. Simply because anytime you have someone who is publicly taking a stance, as the pastors did in Texas, they were willing to go to jail for it.
Went to jail for it.
Went to jail for it.
Came out and went back to jail.
You are now a target, period.
And I think, and thank you for that, brother. And I'm glad again that we were successful in terms of claiming the narrative and just providing a visualization for what peace looks like in our community, because we know that on the flip side, it could have went either way, and it wouldn't necessarily have had to been us who deviated the action in terms of how that could have went. And for clarification on that, we seen what happened in Indianapolis with Brother Sean Reed. We seen what happened to the protesters out there that were tear gassed and that were beaten by officers. So I'm grateful that I and Black Men United was able to lead people peacefully. You know what I'm saying? People were able to return safely to their spaces. We were able to be in the space and organize and come up with new innovative ideas in terms of the community work, and everyone left unharmed.
Right. Yeah, I'm very grateful for that too. And
I am too.
yeah, we prayed for you guys. Let me tell you.
Yes, we did.
Like, you know, please, God, cover you guys, you know, and did everything that we could to make sure that you were covered, because
Yes, ma'am.
You had every right to do what you did. And I have to say, you did it with some class.
Yes, you did.
You know, I was so touched. Like, I was like, you know, what you said, how you did it, even having everybody walk quietly. So a silent protest while you hit these very key issues. You know what I mean? And they were issues that visibly resonated with the community that you were walking through.
Yes,
And a
ma'am.
silent protest is more powerful, in my opinion, than a loud yelling match.
Right?
It speaks volumes. It's very powerful.
Right? With people acting like banshees, y'all were very class. Like, I was just so impressed with how you
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I was just so impressed with how you guys conducted that, honestly. Like, that was just very well done. And there's nothing, what else could the press say after that, right?
That was the goal. That was the goal.
What else could they say?
They could have they could have twisted it, but there was nothing to twist
much
there.
harder.
Right.
Yeah,
You
you
know
made it
they'll
very
demonize
difficult.
Better when they
anything.
don't have the ammunition.
Right.
Right. Yes, ma'am. That was the goal. Yes, ma'am.
So
Right.
going forward, what are your goals? You told us some of your goals going forward. Do you have any goals where you will meet with legislators and make them accountable, especially the ones who represent your community?
Right. So right now our primary mission is to organize our infrastructure and to engage in the community, right? So
Yes.
the work we center around, I would say for the next 30 to 60 days is going to be based on that. I wouldn't say 60 days. 60 days is pretty far. The next 30 days is going to be centered around that, building a deeper, more impactful relationship with the community, being visible to the community, and, you know, just getting the work done. As we approach elections in July,
Yes.
elections in July are real critical for the primaries this year. So as we approach elections in July, and I mentioned that we'll be having the political education classes on Instagram, and we'll work on other platforms to get that out. But I think we'll shift gears in terms of mid-June to conversations around the elections, to meeting with different politicians and holding them accountable, into, you know, getting that work done and getting people to vote, and try to get that awakening in that sense.
So
Well, I commend both of you. You're fine young men. You make us proud. And I'm grateful that you are so involved in your communities and that
Yes.
you're here going forward to educate and empower those within the community. That's so important.
it is important. And I have a question because you two young men are so different. Like, I won't say different because there are other Black men who are powerful, right? But you
Right.
guys stand out in two very different ways too. Like you both have your very unique messages. So
Right.
my question is this: like, Keion, you're a reverend, and so we know, like, you know what the teaching is as far as being a reverend, but you're not your average everyday reverend, right? Something set you apart, and I'm not sure it was the seminary school, right? And same thing, Nevin. Nevin, you came up in Jersey City, you know, went to college. Like, there's a lot of people who walked your path that hasn't become a Nevin Perkins. So my question is, what set you apart? What set you guys on a journey? Like, if was there some defining moment or something? Like, what did it?
I'll go first, just on the chance that yours isn't traumatic, brother, because mine's is, and I would rather you leave on a state of peace. So I lost my brother to gun violence in 2016. He was murdered brutally on Dwight Street in MLK. Uh, Before that, I had lost cousins to gun violence. I had lost friends to gun violence, and I just lost people that I knew and cared about in the neighborhood to senseless killing. But when my brother died, I was in a rough space emotionally for a few months. You know, I had a lot of misguided anger in me, and I didn't know where to channel it. So I began to read, and I began to find comfort and solace and revolutionaries and different ancestors who had done the work. And I began to connect their traumas and just the bigger picture in terms of, you know, what's the actual enemy. I began to understand what Furious Styles was talking about in the movie Boys in the Hood, talking about we don't own any gun manufacturing companies. We don't have this ownership, but yet we have the tools to destroy ourselves. So I went down that wormhole, you know what I mean? Because I think there's a point in time in everyone's life where they go down that wormhole. So I went down it, and, you know, I came out where I'm at today, and I'm grateful for that. It hurts every time that I think about it, that it had to connect with that traumatic experience for my life, but I try to use that as fuel to keep moving.
Your brother lives on through you.
He does.
Because of you, that there will be a change because of what happened to him.
Right.
You honor him daily.
Yes,
Thank you for
ma'am.
sharing that story. I really appreciate it.
Me too.
Yes, ma'am.
For me, I think it was a couple different things. Nevin will tell you, I don't go anywhere without James Cone. For me, my biological father was not in my life. And it was a constant just pressure. How can I speak to other young men? And then my mother married, and now I have two sisters, and two additional sisters, I should say. How do I show them positivity, right, and still follow this attraction that I had to the ministry? And it wasn't until I saw through reading Christian texts that I had been lied to all this time. That every Black man who ever walked the earth wasn't like my father, right? And so to see the person or the deity rather that I worship also being Black, just looking at where he was from, looking at what he was doing, and to center the gospel around social reformation, that was the work of Christ. And so James Cone, this is a James Cone book. This is not the first James Cone book that I read. The first James Cone book is actually sitting behind me, called For My People, which talked about where the Black church started, where it was in his time, and where it should end up, which is right now. And I think that just set a fire in me to say, even when I preach, I have to, no matter what crowd, white, Black, Filipino, Smurf, whatever crowd I'm preaching to, I have to root this particular message in Blackness, because we have to understand that Jesus didn't become white until at least the 1600s. And that's fairly new, because Ethiopia was Christian way before all of that. Which means
325 AD.
Right, which means that they had the truest form of Christ, which is why now I argue that's why colonizers didn't go to the eastern part of Africa, because Egypt and Ethiopia had already been Christian for so long. And so James Cone really set that fire, reconcentrating or annexing the gospel into not prosperity, not, Jesus make your enemy your footstool, but why did Jesus get crucified? Right? How did his lynching on a dogwood tree that turned into a cross translate to the lynching of my ancestors in the South? Right? And then meeting Nevin, kind of showing him and him showing me, okay, this is not two separate movements. Black consciousness and civil rights are one and the same.
Right.
And here's how you do it. Here's how the religious side played into the social side. And here's how the social side speaks to people who are not religious. So us kind of garnering that trust in one another, that ultimately led into a very good friendship where we could talk about these things, and also working with a person who like Nevin, who may not go to church, who may not sometimes even understand all the things that I'm doing, and likewise him being able to work together but being our own person, because both of our messages are different, but they're one and the same, which is why we are able to work with each other. But also reading Baldwin and noticing how he was a minister who was homosexual, right? Looking at the treatment of my mother as a single mother, not even knowing why my father was in she got knocked up. That wasn't the case, right? But the treatment of her from our own church.
Yeah.
How do we root that into the Black struggle of women, period?
Right.
Right? And so I think all of that is this big bowl that just set this fire, because for a very long time, every man was my father. Jesus had become my father because he is not physically here. But it's something in the reading of text that says, he lives on. He says to John, I am the one who conquered death and life, right? And then later on in Revelations, John sees the color of his skin of bronze and hair, wool, translation, black and nappy, right?
Yeah.
That changed my perspective of Jesus. James Cone changed the perspective of the church for me. And so that is what set that fire. And I think Nevin, he just put more coal in the fire, and I just became crazy.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
So
sir.
you give us hope that there is already happening within you a modern day reformation
Mhm.
of the Black church, and it's necessary and needed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you
Because
had to, if you were having a conversation
Mhm.
with another pastor or another reverend, what would your advice be? What would you want to talk to them about?
I typically ask questions, and that's how I form advice. So what is your church doing for the community you serve? Do you realize sometimes it's a realization, right? We get all these degrees and we forget the core of text, right? We think we can interpret Greek and now that's all we're going to preach on. No. Do you realize, or do you read in between the lines to see what Jesus really stood up for? Because it
Right.
wasn't money, because he was poor. It wasn't finest clothes, because he probably didn't smell good. It wasn't grooming yourself, because he probably looked crazy. Matter of fact, Isaiah said he was ugly. um,
pushback.
so when you do your ministry, are you truly reaching people? That's my question. If the answer 9 times out of 10, it's I'm reaching people, but I gotta grow the church. I'm reaching people, but I'm doing this and doing that. I'm worried about paying the light bill. And so what I say to them is remember that no matter what your seat is, meaning regardless if you're senior pastor or associate pastor, your title is still reverend. And in reverend, meaning God shows reverence, right, on you, or the church that you're ordained under has seen you reverence God. Whatever way you look at it, the way you reverence God is through community work, period.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's more so of a mandate than it is, I would say, advice. It's a mandate. When he says go out and spread my word, we just think it's the gospel. It's also his ways.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right? We have to realize that Jesus, his ministry was funded by a prostitute. We want to talk about that in the Black church.
Right.
Right?
It's true.
So, that's what I say. I mean, I sit with tons of Black pastors, especially in the Jersey City community, that have told me, I'm not getting into the whole social justice thing because that's just not what it is. But all your church is filled with mothers who are either widows
Right.
or who are mourning the loss of their sons. How
Yeah.
dare you?
Right.
How dare you not? You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Do something about that. And that's why I have so much respect for people like Cone and King, who were PhDs.
Mm-hmm.
People like Huey P. Newton, who wasn't a pastor, but he had a PhD. People like, well, not really Du Bois. He kind of just stayed in his office and wrote, but his contributions are enough, right? People like Angela Davis, who wasn't a pastor, but she lived the life as a pastor, meaning that she was educated, but she spent most of her time on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need the Black church to return to. And I think Nevin does that even with other activists and organizations who don't really even want to associate themselves with BMU. He revitalizes and he calls them again to the work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We are not supposed to befriend politicians. We're supposed to critique politicians. We're
Right.
not supposed to dine in the same spaces unless it is we about to sit here, eat this fried chicken, I'm about to tell you about yourself. That's the call of activism. That's the call of the church. And it is time for us to get back to that. I can't stress that enough. I mean, you've sat in meetings with me, Samaya, and I've always said we have to do. I told you and your husband, I said, y'all need to be careful because they about to shut down everything, and I don't need nothing to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just really quick on that, in terms of how we hold these people accountable, there's a quote that Desmond Tutu, it's a very famous quote, and it says, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. So in terms of holding these institutions, these churches, these organizations accountable, we have to let them know that if you are doing nothing, you are working to our demise, period.
Yep. You're a part of the problem.
And one of the things I noticed too, modern day churches don't have a lot of young people in them, at least the ones I've seen.
We're leaving.
And so how do you, what's the disconnect? Because if there's no young people in, 20 years, ain't gonna be no church.
This is
Right.
why there's no young people. There's no young people because so young people statistically, according to the Academy of Religion, who are Christians, they're either not going to church or they're joining mainstream, which is white, mainstream churches.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Good question.
They're joining mainstream churches because the white churches are the folks that are on the ground now. It's liberal politics.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fighting for you to get something for myself. We typically don't see that, but that's what it is. So they're joining these, Fruit Loop and Lucky Charm churches, right? And our churches who were once spirit-filled and fire-lit, we're dimming.
Mm-hmm.
And we're leaving because our churches are no longer standing up for something. We have these pastors, and I love the South, so Dr. E, don't shoot me for this. We have these pastors who've come to the North from the South in search of their own plantation. Why? Because they take off their kingly, princely black church robe and they put on a janitor's uniform, and so they feel within themselves that they don't have anything else to control but their own church. That's one case. So they control their own spaces. And that means that when I control you, we do what I say and not what's needed. Or you get these big time church pastors who are degreed up, PhD, demon having folks who have become a product of demonology. I'm pastoring a black church because I'm black, not necessarily because I want to be here. I'm pastoring a black church because it's big. I can kind of formulate my own while I'm still moving my own chess pieces in the places that I want. I'm going to have the politician come in and be my friend because that gives me status as not just a pastor theologian, but a spiritual advisor. And I can then tell my congregation who to vote for. It's all a control game. And I'm not going to ordain women because women historically speak the truth. Men, we call that emotion, but it's really the truth. Right? But we're not going to give you credentialing. So then we see black women who are called to the ministry, they leave and they become either AME because they have women bishops, or they go to mainstream churches and they pastor multicultural congregations. And so this is why young people and women alike are leaving the church, because they're not standing up for anything, because we have these old men who barely shower trying to keep doing what they've been doing for 40 years, and they're not taking heed to the culture. And that is a dangerous place to be. Isaiah calls us to stand up for the widow and speak up for the voiceless. And we are no longer doing that. We are reading the text as something as just pure theology, and we're not rooting it behind action. And that is a dangerous place to be, right? And so Jeremiah Wright said, I would never, ever put my flock in a position where there's blood on my hands. There should be blood on the pulpit, meaning there should be a sacrifice at the altar, but never blood on my hands. Because I, as the pastor, I, as the under shepherd, I am charged to lead these people to liberation. And 9 times out of 10, when we read the text, Jesus is never trying to win souls over. It's because of what he has done for these people through liberating them socially and emotionally a lot of times that brought them closer as a follower to Jesus Christ. Not because he was just over here trying to speak in tongues and do that. No, he was just healing the sick, healing people that was bleeding, and they said, oh my God, I can make something of myself. You must be speaking something good. That used to be the church.
Well,
The church used to give people a...
He was a transformational leader.
Right.
Jesus, he was a transformational leader. And after the 70s, there was no more transformations happening in the South nor around the rest of the country.
Amen.
Right.
And that's the problem that we're running into. And we're not the only ones running into that problem.
Right.
You know, I've been heavily involved in the anti-vaccine movement, and many of them do not attend church
Mm-hmm.
because there's no transformation of the truth happening within the church. There's no guidance in the church from the pulpit about how do you proceed and how will God help me do this. People feel like they're on their own, and I in the Black community it's the same way. Why would you go to church just to give a tithe? Where is it going? While you're still struggling and suffering here, and you don't have a direction as to how to pull yourself out, and you don't have a leader helping you to do that. So that's the problem. As you said, everything you just said is true, and that's the problem going forward within our communities. The church has got to get back to being transformational,
Right.
and we need that now in this space.
Right.
Because it can't be you have no church, you don't have education. Like it has to be some type of foundation that's being built within our community. So,
Right.
something has to be fixed somewhere. You know, we
Yeah.
either have to get back to educating our children and making them aware of who they are and where they come from, or they have to have a space where they're able to get that understanding of who they are. But they have to get it from somewhere, because you can't have grown Black men and women not having a foundation and knowing where they come from and trying to live out in the society that we have today.
Well, here's the thing, is Keion says, so you've got single mothers out here with children. And instead of having a safe place for those children to go to in the evenings, which would be the church, if you take some of that tithe money that you have, open up the annex buildings, have a safe place for them to come and be tutored, help them with their homework and what have you, until this mother gets off from work. She doesn't have that. So you've got latchkey kids going home that she's worried about. She doesn't know what's going to happen. And these kids are left to their own devices. And this is how we denigrate our neighborhoods and our communities on a daily basis. But yet we've got all these churches on every corner. Meet the needs of the community, and the church can do that.
Right.
Start meeting the needs of the community, and you'll find that people will, as Keion said, Jesus wasn't begging folk to follow him. He really wasn't. He was doing what he had to do here. He was educating here, here, and here, empowering the people to be responsible for yourselves and understand that you've got support in my Heavenly Father. But who's doing that in the community now? What are they doing for the community? Until we can get back to that, we're going to have these kids out here, out in the streets, deciding what to do for themselves and being influenced by others who don't mean them any good, because they don't have another base to go to,
Right.
or someone that's there to mentor them. That should be the role of the church.
Right. Right.
Why should we have to pay for everything? Why should a mother have to pay for everything? Why should a family have to pay for everything when you've got this church community right here in your neighborhood?
Mm-hmm.
Doors closed except when you want Bible study, prayer meeting, and open on Sundays, or fish fry on Saturdays. No.
A good example of I think transformational leadership has been Jeremiah Wright's church, which is now under the direction of the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, who he himself is a liberation theologian. He's more of a homiletician too. But he gave, I think, about $5,000 to each member of his church for their health bills and things like that. It made the news. I mean, Otis Moss is doing some great things, but he is the exception,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because he pastors this huge church, and he's doing great work. Now it's for the smaller churches to create an alliance with other churches and other religious organizations, just like Otis Moss did, to get their people on the right track. And but statistically, to Samaya's point, you got people that's leaving, and it's because of the things that Dr. E highlighted. right? And the only church that we've seen kind of really do this, I mean, for me on a public scale, is Dr. Maltz's church, right?
Yeah.
But look at the pastor before him. It was Jeremiah Wright, who was doing beautiful things before he had to retire, right? And so
Right.
that church will always be that type of church, and it's inherently African. I mean, they have an Ethiopian altar cross. I mean, come on, how beautiful is just the blackness in that particular spectrum, that circle.
Right.
But it's time for the churches that are on the every corner to get it together. But the reason why our inner cities have these churches that are storefronts on every corner next to liquor stores and brothels, some of them, is because of the whole control factor. We're gonna split from this church because I don't agree with this pastor. Instead of being able to come together with your differences, there's certain things that Nevin disagrees with me fundamentally on. I will tell you, I mean, the whole Pan-Africanistic movement, I'm new to that. I wasn't into all that. I'm like, what about us here today? Nev had to open up my eyes and say, no, what about this on a global spectrum, right? And so that is a testament to, let's talk out our differences, let's root this in context, and let's get the work done. But unless pastors are ready to do that, then it won't happen.
And it's
No,
always
it's true.
the issue, as a division is always the issue.
Right.
Instead of finding a way to come together with some type of bond, you know, we just constantly have this division, and we're not in a place anymore where we can afford to have that type of division.
No,
We
can't.
never were.
Because the thing is, no matter where we go in different parts of the world, we're all seen as the same.
Right.
We see ourselves as different,
Mm-hmm.
but we're all the same. You know, so we're not in a place where we could afford to be divided at this time. And that's something that we really have to understand.
Right. And it's okay to disagree. I mean, if you didn't disagree on anything, then you would be clones, right?
Right.
You wouldn't be so uniquely different and bring your perspectives that are unique to you, which to me makes a much more powerful team, right? If everybody sits at the table, go, yeah, what is that? You know what I mean? You
Right.
need the people who could sit there and hash it out, maybe even argue with each other, because what you come out on the other end, and I've studied I'm actually fascinated with teamwork. When you come out the other end of that hashing, you have a better outcome than you would if everybody just agreed when they sat down.
That's
Right.
Because it makes everybody think harder and bring and justify, because you may hold the position but never really thought about it. Now that you have to hash this out with somebody, now you have to not only think about it, but now you have to defend it. And it may not be defendable, or maybe it is. But usually what comes out on the other end is always better, as long as the parties remain committed to the process, that teamwork process, right?
I mean, even in the talk that you did at NJCU, which I found out through trustworthy, sources, a lot of people told people not to come out.
Really?
Yeah, I spoke with one of the professors from the department, not the professor that you were talking to, but one of the other professors from the department. He was like, yeah, I told my students, because I invited classes like me and Nevin told you, and I told my students not to go because of blah, blah, blah. That was a testament to what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
How you had an activist and an academic who disagreed, and then they could agree, and then you opened up her eyes to a lot. I mean, a lot. I think just being a Black woman and that whole side of health, Black health, that she probably doesn't even study. The professor that Samaya and Nevin both were on the panel with, I mean, that is a testament of teamwork, right? How all of us at the table did not agree on certain things. It wasn't even my forte. I had to root everything in public health theology, which is an actual field.
Wow.
So I and then Nevin had to come in and rooted in activism, and you had the health, and she had the health. It was just a lot, but it came together, and we're called to be mosaics.
Right.
Yes.
All of us are pieces, different shapes and different colors.
Right.
And that's the thing that we have to get back to. We look at these differences as differences, but we need to start looking at them as individual strengths and
Right.
pieces.
Right.
To the
Cool.
puzzle. And form the alliance to save your community.
Mhm.
Right. Fred Hampton had it right in Illinois in the late 60s when he came up with the Rainbow Coalition and he had the Black Panther Party. You know what I'm saying? This is history. We got to study it. We got to teach it to the young brothers and sisters so they know. Fred Hampton, you know what I'm saying? He organized the Rainbow Coalition and he had white gangs, white politicians, Latino politicians, nonprofit organizations, and he had the Black Panther Party of Illinois central to that. And, you know, he was creating peace and organization and unity between different marginalized communities. We got to get back to that.
Yes, absolutely. And I make it my business to listen to different types of news sources, right? Some
Yeah.
people, they have their favorite, right? They listen to MSNBC or they listen to Fox or they listen to Breitbart or they listen to whatever, right?
Right.
And so they only know one perspective.
Mhm.
You'll
Right.
argue with them on the same incident and y'all argue different facts because these different sources gave out different facts. How
Right.
this could be, I don't know. And the only reason I really know is because I listen to everybody. And I'm just like, it can't be two sets of facts, but obviously now that's what's happening. Literally what we're being polarized. The American public is being polarized, even with the pandemic. I almost said plandemic. Even with this current pandemic, it's such a polarization, right? You got the liberal perspective and you got the Republican perspective. It's the facts of the coronavirus or SARS-2, they can't be like, are we talking about the same thing, right? It's just amazing. But in order to counter that, we have to be able to listen to stuff we don't agree with. I mean, really listen to it with an open mind, because maybe you'll agree with some of it.
Well, there's only one thing you're not hearing the truth about that can't be altered no matter what newscast you hear it on. That coronavirus is curable 99.98%. And that is around this country and around the world. But that's the one fact that has been left out. And that's for a reason. And when I look at how they're doing this, they're good at it because they've been good at it. They've used it in our community so much to keep us in our place, to make sure that if we got here, we were taken down a peg because they would come in with something here that we couldn't meet or reach within our communities. And the silence, and I keep going back to this, the silence of our Black religious leaders, the closed annex doors of our corner churches. It's as if it's just what you just said, teamwork. They don't all have to agree, but they can form an alliance through Christ. After all, who are you doing this for? All of his disciples didn't agree. Some of them even turned on him. But he still represented people from every walk of life.
Right.
So that we could see the example and follow it. And yet here we are, nothing. Because if you profess that Christ is your Savior, then our leaders are theologians. They're not the folk that are sitting in the Capitol or the ones in DC, state Capitol, the ones in DC. And you want to know why folk are turning away from the church. That's one of the reasons. You don't need to go and sit just to hear a few songs, to hear a homily, because that's all it is. I don't care if you do it for an hour. If you're not studying the word, you don't really know the word. You just get to hear a synopsis summary of it on a Sunday. And then you leave to serve. Serve what? Who are you serving if the church isn't the first servant? Church isn't serving you, so how can you serve someone because you haven't been taught how to serve?
Right.
And this is our disconnect within our communities. And I'm happy to see what the two of you, Keion and Nevin, you two are doing, because this is how we're going to get back
Right.
to where we should have been in the first place,
Yes,
back
ma'am.
to where we were before the civil rights movement came along and integrated us all to disperse and not come back together and leave these communities behind with no one to actually lead.
Right. So we're going to have to wrap it up now. But I really appreciate you guys coming back here and talking to us. This has been a really great discussion. And
Really has been.
oh yeah, we definitely, I really hope you guys would be regular contributors here, because we'd really love to have you come back, you
I'm
know.
down.
Okay, great. So,
Count me in.
okay, wonderful, wonderful. We'll look forward to future discussions with you guys. And I want to thank our audience for being with us and for listening to our discussion. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, like us on Facebook. We're on Instagram at My Black Health, and we're also on Twitter, My Black Health 2, the number 2 behind it. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you in our next episode.